got some baseball now. Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. He'll join us now to take a look at the latest. There's a lot with baseball that is kind of happening right before our very eyes. It's all kind of moving and shaking and changing. We'll get Frank in here to give us a little bit of the latest that we now know on baseball's situation. Could we be seeing baseball sooner, later, July? Is that what we're thinking? Let's take a look at the hurdles, the financial battle that could save the season and more. Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. What's up, Frank?
Hey, guys. How are you?
Oh, man. So we saw this baseball thing, and it was like, all right, they gave us dates. It seemed like Trevor Plouffe was actually accurate. And now we have the potential of this ugly financial battle. Is that the biggest hurdle, or do you see other issues that still remain with baseball having a season?
Well, the biggest one clearly is the compensation. Now, when MLB earlier in the season, when they broke on March 12th, the plan was, okay, we'll front you some money and you'll be paid for the prorated number of games per your contract. Well, they didn't really expect that there would not be fans in the stands. Let's face it, when a lot of this happens, we're thinking, okay, we go home for a couple of weeks and then we're ready to go. And certainly this has not played out that way. So right now the question is, are the players actually willing to give more? Now, the 50-50 split you and Hunter were just talking about is kind of the word that's been out there in terms of the revenue. But Tony Clark, the former Detroit Tigers first baseman, who now is the Players Association president, he doesn't like that idea very much. He thinks that's a salary cap and something which they fought to avoid this entire time. So the kind of the concern for the player side is if you agree to just make it based upon revenues, then there will be a salary cap going forward, and that's something that they don't want. So this is going to be a little tricky because if it's kind of a rejection of the whole concept of splitting the revenue in any way whatsoever, maybe they will never accept that. Maybe they just have to suck it up and take a loss. And I don't know how many baseball teams in the major leagues right now could just flat out take a loss to get this going in hopes that the goodwill will carry on to future seasons.
Right. Now, are they talking about doing some sort of CBA for just this 2020 season, like kind of just for this, or is this kind of going to be the basis of moving forward as well?
Here's the funny thing. I mean, the CBA is set to expire. So basically up to this point, MLB and the Players Association have been pretty good at working together to resolve issues before that. In other words, they're not waiting till the next CBA. So that relationship has been pretty good. And since this current CBA is set to expire, basically what you're kind of at right now is, look, we got to figure out how to do this. And right now, of course, you're on very, very different sides of how to make this work. And at some point, the players will have to ask the question, well, how much are we willing to work for? And even other questions that are different than money. Are we willing to work? A couple players expressed their concern with safety. Jake Diekman, who was the former Phillies reliever, you might remember him. He was a part of that Cole Hamels trade headed to Texas. But he is someone who's dealt with ulcerative colitis. He has a young child. He's not necessarily that comfortable, at least at this point in time, going back to work. So usually most of the discussions are about the money, but other players besides him, Sean Doolittle, they want to make sure that everybody's safe, and even not just the players, but all the staff, right? So you were talking about testing a little while ago, and and media and how many people they'll let in. I mean, there's a lot that's involved with getting that game on the field that's well beyond just 9 players on each side. You have the video production, the audio production, security, media. There's a whole mess of people involved in this, and you can't do it without massive amounts of people. And first and foremost, some of the players, they want to be safe.
In this new proposal, it says that teams will play in their home ballparks without any fans, instead of maybe going with the NBA route where they want to quarantine their players in one specific city. Do you think that the home ballpark situation will work out? Does it seem like there's too many problems that can occur due to travels?
It's an interesting question. I think the idea behind it is that a lot of players will feel safe in their own home, and so if you're playing in home cities, then you're able to essentially do that. Most of them have a residence locally to the city in which they play, and they'll feel safe there. And actually, it might even be safer than if you're putting a whole bunch of people in a hotel and having people come out, in and out delivering food and stuff like that. So I think that's behind it, and I think that's also a reason why the spring training sites are sort of the backup plan if they need to pivot to another location for safety reasons, such as if there is a major outbreak in New York City. Well, then the Yankees go to Tampa, and then the Mets go to Port St. Lucie, or the Phillies go to Clearwater. Or actually, since international travel is a problem right now, the Toronto Blue Jays could play in Dunedin, their spring training site. Again, just trying to give them that sense of home and having the ability to live in their own residences, or perhaps for those that have a spring residence, they can live in those.
Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. So a 50-50 revenue split, an 82-game schedule, a mid-June spring training, an early July opening day, a 14-team postseason, games played in home stadium. DH would be coming to the National League. Here's one that's kind of interesting. Games against divisional and regional opponents. So essentially the Phillies in the East would be playing the NL East and the AL East. That would be part of their 82-game schedule. You would not see West Coast trips. You would not see Central trips, but you would see interleague games. So NLs would play AL East, AL West would play NL West. Is that the understanding that we have?
Yeah, I think they're just trying to minimize travel and try to be closer to home for any time that they need to pivot in one way or another. And certainly if you have two New York teams that would play each other a lot, it's pretty easy to get from St. Petersburg to Miami, and from or if the Toronto Blue Jays are playing out of Dunedin, they're down there as well, and Atlanta and to Philadelphia, Baltimore. It's just a lot easier, and perhaps they feel like they can contain it a little better than having cross-country travel. Although I did ask the question.
All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Frank Klose is with us. And, Frank, we actually did talk about that, the possibility of, if everybody's tested, they fly and they land in San Diego, Pittsburgh, wherever. What's the difference? But obviously I think they want to minimize, because one of the things I heard was they want to try to keep travel to bus travel, right? They want teams to kind of bus to different places as opposed to having to go to airports, going through that whole situation, landing somewhere, being in a town for a couple of days where you have to stay in a hotel. Well, I guess you'd have to do that anyway, whether you bus or fly there. But I guess they're trying to just take as many precautions as possible. But I guess the last part of this scenario was obviously that they could expand the rosters, right, from 26 to 30, and that obviously no fans would be in the stadium. So the expanded roster thing, I think, is an interesting thing, because we talked about before the possibility of the minor league players, the guys like Spencer Howard, the guys that Alec Boehm, that were kind of right there. What happens to those players?
Well, it sounds like they have the phrase I heard used was taxi squad, where you might have 20 players kind of hanging around to be available for you. So you may not have an active roster of 45 to 50, but you might have 45 to 50 players around in case you need them. And, I think in a scenario like that, it's actually beneficial to the Phillies because, Spencer Howard, Alec Boehm, they might have risen to the major leagues in July anyway. It's not a really long season. If you're worried about pitch counts on Spencer Howard's arm, you can kind of let those guys loose. And another advantage the Phillies have, we kept talking about all the veteran bench potential players like the Logan Forsyths and the Josh Harrisons. And, if you have all these extra options, the Phillies actually might have some better options than other teams. So it seems like and really it just comes down to you have to have some contingency if somebody gets hurt, or, God forbid somebody contracts the virus. If maybe you need to switch some players in and out for that reason too. That's something to think about. So it sounds like they're going to make sure that there's plenty of options, so no team feels super short, because you're not going to be able to call up the phone to AAA Allentown and to the Lehigh Valley and just say, hey, take the next take the next flight from Allentown to wherever we are. I mean, you need more players, and that's kind of the idea behind that.
You think about the 82-game regular season? Is that enough? Is that okay? You can live with it? How do you feel about 82? It's essentially half of the season.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I went back to last season and looked at how the Phillies were at 82 games, and they were 43-39. They were tied for fourth place in the National League with the Colorado Rockies. Now, neither team made the playoffs when it was all said and done. So I think there is an argument to be made that it might not be a big enough sample size when you're looking at, in terms of a regular season. And maybe that's why they expanded the playoffs a little bit, so that, somebody doesn't sneak in. Somebody will sneak in perhaps because you're adding more teams. But if at 82 games that was it last year, guess what? The Washington Nationals don't make the playoffs.
Do we know where the Phillies would have been?
They were fourth with the Colorado Rockies. So the Rockies-Phillies would have been in the playoffs. Washington Nationals would not have. So maybe this gives you a little bit more of an opportunity so that nobody kind of misses out because of the shorter season. And, let's face it, baseball is a big marathon season. Players get injured constantly, and then usually you're out for your 10 to 15 days, and then that's it. But that's a significant chunk now. So when you think of it to scale, one little injury, your best player might be gone a fifth of the season, whereas they used to be gone a tenth of the season. So the extra playoffs maybe will make up for some of that. But it's pretty interesting to think of 82 as not a big sample size when you consider that basketball and hockey are used to doing that.
You kind of touched on it. I was going to go then. It kind of makes sense that they are going to expand to 14 teams because it gives you some room to play with if you didn't start out as hot as you probably could have, but you're still a good baseball team, or, just keeps the door open for some of these squads to get into postseason play.
Yeah, I certainly would think that some teams are going to feel like they were so much better than they were, and they missed out because of an injury here or there. And this hopefully should level the playing field a little bit. Although, as we saw last year and other years, if a team gets hot at the right time, then that's really what's going to determine it at the end. So, really, when you get to the playoffs, it's still going to be about who's the hottest team.
Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. These guys will have more on this tonight during the Powder Blue podcast, and you can hear that from 6 to 7 right here on 97.3 ESPN. Yes or no, are we going to have baseball July 4th? I'm
not confident totally to yes, but I think it's more likely than not. I think at some point the baseball players there might be a little bit, but it's almost like any CBA in the history of professional sports, the other side always said no first. Nobody said, oh, yeah, sure, right off the bat. So I think there'll be some back and forth, and I think there could be some contentious points, but I'm hopeful. I lean on the yes side here.
Yeah, I mean, do you think the revenue split, because the interesting thing to me is that the revenue split seems to be like none of the other stuff. Hunter asked about 82 games, the DH, playing here, playing there, doing that. It seems that the revenue sharing, the quote is a non-starter, that if they can't get past that, all these other things are almost irrelevant.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is baseball is going to have to guarantee salaries to a certain percentage of their normal salary.
Well, Fred, let me stop you right there for 1 second, because we were asked about this before. So there is a revenue split with whatever revenue they bring in. And I heard that one of the reasons why they want to play in their home ballparks is to get the revenue for advertising on, the outfield wall, just to try to bring some in. So that would be the revenue split that they're talking about in the 50-50, not what the owners want to pay salary-wise, like a prorated number, correct?
A lot of this isn't really public knowledge yet, but I at least I feel what's going to happen. This is just my take listening to the way that they've responded to all this is the owners know they're not going to make any money from ticket sales. The money's only coming in from certain places such as broadcast and advertising, and the players are going to have to agree to some sort of pay cut beyond. So originally they just wanted to pay them on a prorated basis for the number of games they played. But right now they're kind of at the point where they don't believe that they can even afford to do that. because the revenue streams will be so low. So I think they were trying to just split whatever came in with the idea that, okay, well, our money's down and we'll make sure we share it with you accordingly when we determine your new salaries. But what I think what the MLB Players Association is saying that they don't like that idea. They don't want the idea of their income being tied to revenues. They don't think they'll ever agree to that. So I think what's going to have to happen is they're going to have to agree to a prorated portion of their salaries, and maybe, and this is just me personally guessing, maybe they have to pay the players some money later. Maybe they agree to postpone payment into future seasons when the revenues are back up. That's the only thing I can think of, because they're going to want to be paid what they agreed to for this season. And as Scott Boras, the super agent, basically said, like, well, no, we already have agreed to contracts. We're not renegotiating them.
That's interesting, because you get a guy like, say, Mike Trout, who makes, $34 million. You could be hard-pressed to think that a team, and I don't know. See, I don't know what the revenues are on selling a billboard sign or putting those boards up here or whatever cockamamie thing they want to do to try to get revenue. Did you hear that as well? That's what I heard, Frank, is that they want to play in their home ballparks because they want the opportunity to be able to make some revenue on advertising.
I had not heard that particular angle yet, but it certainly makes a lot of sense because, your local audience will be watching, and a lot of times the advertisements are for your local market. So it certainly makes sense that they would want to maximize the dollars. And who knows, maybe with fewer games, there's a better premium you can charge for some of those ads, when you know that the eyes will be perhaps greater at some point. So lots of options for revenue, but a lot of that I think still needs to be worked out.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't know what the time frame would be. They're talking about a mid-June spring training, so I guess they've given themselves a couple of weeks to try to hammer something back and forth here, right? Do you think there's got to be something done this week, or do you think, no, it can be 2 to 3 weeks before they finally get this done?
That's a good question. I don't think this is going to resolve quickly, but a month from now, giving the players – I think the players need at least 3-4 weeks to get back in shape, but maybe, who knows? Maybe right now they're hearing that this is happening. The Players Association is trying to work something out. Maybe they're working at getting in shape wherever they are. But it seems like certainly the players aren't doing anything else. So if they call them one day and say, "Hey, get on a plane and go to Clearwater," there's really nothing stopping them, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Theoretically, you could play games in Clearwater and still do some local advertising from the Philly market. If those games are still on television, they would still be seen in the Philly market. So I guess playing games at it's not called Bright House, Spectrum Field would still be able to. You would still be able to bring in that local. I guess that's as opposed to playing in a bubble scenario.
Yeah, if you play in a bubble, then there's only one left field, right? If everybody's playing at Chase Field or playing at Marlins Park or Tropicana Field, so at least you'll have some variety. Although it's not going to be a perfect science because at some point teams will have to pivot. The Toronto Blue Jays, they play in the biggest market in Canada, but there's certainly not the advertising space in Dunedin, even after their beautiful renovation this year. So. But yeah, that's the only way you're going to have. In other words, Chase Field in Arizona is not going to be advertising Rogers Communications, the cable provider in Florida. In Dunedin, but you might be able to do it in Florida.
Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. Obviously, these guys will dive deeper into this tonight on the Powder Blue podcast. Outside of the MLB and the MLPA, there's a broad discussion about whether it makes medical sense for all these professional sports teams to resume at all. And outside of the medical field, there is likely going to be pressure on MLB to begin the season after we saw the UFC get back out there this week. So we'll see. This is a really interesting thing to keep an eye on because, remember, NHL and NBA are all coming down the stretch of their seasons. Baseball never got theirs off the ground. So those sports have some money built up based on this season, whereas baseball really did not get anything going financially this season. So this will be an interesting conundrum for Major League Baseball. All right, Frank, we'll listen tonight and see what more you guys have during the Powder Blue podcast. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, bud. Frank Klose, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.